if you could just go ahead and send us a comment, or if you can hear us. This is going to be a live stream, so it's not a perfection at all. So there may be some quirks or anything like that. So we just wanted to go ahead and see if anybody's out there. Let me go ahead and take a look at what we got. All right. So we are good. Waiting for some participants to come in and we'll move along. Brother, I'm just laughing because I'm getting all types of texts right now.
Okay. I am too over here too. Hey,
So I
I'm
am
glad my
getting
phone's on silent.
right. All right. All right. We got some folks pulling in. Hey, Tammy, can you hear us? All right. Can anybody hear us out there? Go ahead and shout out to us. All right. All right. All right. They can hear us. All right.
All right, brother, it's on you.
All right. Here we go. Here we go. All right. Welcome to the Hill of Justice Live. I'm your host, Jerome Hill, and with me is retired Sheriff Victor Hill, also the co host of Hill of Live. Today, we proudly announce and introduce a man whose name is synonymous with decisive decision making, and particularly with leadership. It's unwavering discipline and it's results driven legacy that you all come to know. And this is all what embodies Victor Hill. So, as you know, he's no stranger to public service, and he's using this platform to go ahead and speak. Uh, and for everyone that wants to know about it, his reputation precedes him. If you want results, this is the man that you need to go ahead and look to. He's protected many communities, and certainly, with that, he upholds justice and he leads with integrity under immense pressure. And that's what he's been under over the past few years. So, without further ado, I want to go ahead and leave the mic over to my brother, Victor Hill.
Thank you, brother. And let me just say this. I love that shirt you got on. The hat is questionable, but thank you for wearing that shirt. But anyway, let's get straight into business because there's just three things that everybody want to know
Sure.
about my announcement about me running for Congress. And there's three things that they want to know: why I'm running, um, who asked me to run, because that's very, very important. The second thing they want to know is, am I running as a Democrat or Republican? And the third thing that everyone has been asking is what district I'm running in. So let's just get right in it and cut through the chase.
Mhm.
In order for me to explain why I'm running, I need to talk about who asked me to run and why. And I've been in politics a long time, brother. When people run for office, they used to come see me all the time and they would say, well, they asking me to run. And when you ask who they is, usually they can't tell you because half the time there is no they. And then, of course, you got a group of people who will say, hey, the Lord asked me to run. And I'm not going to question that or get into that because I don't know who he talks to. But I was actually asked to run by a committee. And I'm very proud to say I was asked to run by that committee. And we actually have a person who's the head of that committee here today. He was one of the leaders of that committee. So to introduce him and to understand where this is going, there's no stranger that I have been bestowed this status of convicted felon. And there's a whole story behind that, which of course, I wrote a book about, and there's a documentary coming out on it. But not only did that occur, and we'll get into that a little bit, but I was actually sent to a real prison, not a camp like most people are. And I was actually put in one of the prisons that's considered one of the 10 worst federal prisons that there are. And I was put into a very violent housing unit, and that no doubt was done by design. But to everyone's surprise, especially the people who put me in that housing unit, something very different happened than what people thought would have. I think people thought that these inmates were going to isolate me or they were going to shank me or do things that because cops aren't well received. But actually, the exact opposite occurred. These guys actually began to rally for my cause, began to research. And the interesting thing that happened was after count every night, there was this little prayer service that the inmates would hold. And there were two ministers in there in particular. One of them, whose wife was nice enough to send me this hat and shirt that I have on. That's why I'm wearing this because I hope they see it. And one night we're at this prayer study, and one of the ministers looked at me while he was preaching, and out of nowhere he said, "I understand you used to live a very privileged life," and everybody erupted in laughter because it was kind of funny. And he said, "You do realize that you were sent here for a reason, right?" And of course, I was kind of bewildered because the only reason I know I was sent there is because I was set up and the trial was rigged by the judge and the DA for political reasons. And what he said was the reason you were sent here is to see what happens so that you could go out and fight for us and be our voice. Well, from that moment on, something interesting happened. I ended up writing a book. I can't really say I wrote the book. They wrote that book. It was their idea to write it. It would have never happened. So even though my name is the author of this book, they actually wrote that book. And the book is dedicated to them. And I refer to them as my professors. But they didn't just become my English professors. They just didn't become my martial art instructors and my chess teachers and stuff like that. They also became my political advisors. And it was their idea. They're the ones that told me that, hey, a convicted felon can run for Congress. They might have eliminated you from running from the state seat or your old seat, but they can't stop you from doing that. And they said something very interesting. They said, look, we love to see you go back and be the sheriff again, and hopefully you will. But you can only help that county. You can only help that jail. You won't be able to help us. And we want you to be the voice for us. Well, that was an amazing experience. It's easy for me to say that, but I think what's so great about this guest is we get ready to be introduced to one of the men I was locked up with. And that book wouldn't have been written without him and those guys, and this race wouldn't be happening without them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tory Troup, if you can have him come on.
Hey,
How you
how you
doing
doing,
there?
man? I'm all right.
Uh,
Good to see you again. How you been
It's
doing?
good to see you again under better circumstances.
Oh yeah, definitely. Hey, Jerome, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good, Troop. How you feeling?
I'm all right. It's an honor to be on tonight.
Thank you, thank you.
Hmm.
It's an honor to have you. You know, Troop and I have had more arguments than you and I, Jerome. And I hate to admit it, but most of the time he was right. And yeah, he was right. And I learned a lot from you. And I want to thank you. You know, there's a
Okay.
lot of good conversations we had. I don't know if you remember this. I want to show you this, but you actually gave me this one day in the library. And it's
Uh,
actually the Constitution and it
The
has all the Bill of
Constitution.
Rights. Exactly. Because you had
Okay.
some points you wanted to make and some things that you wanted to teach. And you were a great professor.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, I want to thank you and all those guys that took the time to teach me and talk to me and encourage me and also tell me, hey, you need to run for Congress. It's an honor to have y'all endorsement. And I think it's great. I think in that book I wrote a paragraph about my favorite country song, and it says, "My favorite country song is by Garth Brooks. It's Friends in Low Places."
Okay.
And you
Let's hear you
know,
sing
yeah, we're not doing that, right? But
it.
right,
Give us a
but
couple verses.
exactly. But you know, it turns out that hey, the friends in low places are very, very important. It was important to me when I was a street cop. That's how I saw
Mm.
murders. That's how I
Mhm.
found out where all the crime was at. And
Okay.
then I made some of the greatest friends that I could ever think of during that unfortunate incident. So you know, it was a blessing, and I thank you for being here. And I'm glad that you're gonna be a part of this conversation and verify the endorsement on behalf of the men that are still at Forest City Correctional Institute.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. I think for those that knew you and those that didn't know you, I think I can safely say that we all endorse you and encourage you, and can't wait to see you win. And
Thank you.
actually, get into a position where you can take the experiences that you have learned personally and try to make a difference, try to make a change. Uh, and I think it's very important that somebody such as yourself, who has been on both sides of the fence, has been on the the law side and also been on the other side with some of the same people that you put on that side. You have a unique perspective that you can bring to the table and to make some necessary changes. You know,
Thank you.
I think you have a perspective that a lot of people sitting in Washington D.C. they don't have that perspective. You know, it's almost, you know, I'm going to trust the guy that he's actually working on the car, not the guy that's sitting up in the administrative office and telling somebody how to work on the car. You know, so you've been there, you've seen what was going on for yourself. You know how the system is on both sides of the fence, and you know that a change is necessary.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, with that being said, let me go into the platform.
Right.
Okay.
Let me say this. If you're a convicted felon, if you're dating a convicted felon, if you're married to a convicted felon, if you're related to a convicted felon, if you're friends with a convicted felon, or if you don't know a convicted felon and never been convicted a day in your life or don't know anything about it, you need to pay attention to this campaign. If you're in the district I run for, you need to vote for me. And here's why. How we treat convicted felons affects everything in our society: economics, safety, every aspect of life is affected by our criminal justice system. Uh, as my professors taught me when I was there, prison is a microism or microcosm of the real society,
Correct.
and everything is affected there. So when you take a convicted felon, and it's interesting, I write about that in the book. We invite everybody to church. We invite convicted felons to church, and we tell them the Lord is going to forgive them all their sins, and they're forgiven. But society doesn't do that to convicted felons. They're convicted for the rest of their lives, because even though they may be through with their probationary status, they're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to run for elected offices. They're not allowed to carry firearms ever again, even if they're convicted for a nonviolent offense. There are a lot of jobs that they're kept from. There are some states where you actually can't even get a barber's license if you're a convicted felon. And there are
Right.
people who have actually done their time. They've paid their debt to society, and they want to go on and they want to be professional. They want to be positive. They want to be in prosperity, but they're not allowed to. Now, I'm not making any excuses for anybody, but when you take options from people, then sometimes this is why you get people reoffending.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do reoffend, anyone can be a victim of that reoffense. So, how we deal with the convicted felons is very, very important. So, this affects everybody. So, like I said, whether you're convicted or not, this is something that you need to be a part of because it needs to be reformed. There are 19 million Americans that now have that status as convicted felons. And what we got to understand is, how did a lot of these people get to be convicted? You know, there are more people that are a victim of this new thing that's called lawfare, and it's actually not new at all. We read about it back in ancient times, back as far as in the Bible. But there's not just politicians, it's not just celebrities that are victims of lawfare because they want to put a convicted status on you, like they did me, because they want to get you out of the political process so that they don't have to face you at the polls. There are everyday people that are the victims of lawfare and end up in the system. And the main reason how they end up in the system is grand juries. Grand juries is something that a lot of people don't know. America is the only country left that uses a grand jury consistently. Liberia still has them, but they rarely ever use them. The United Kingdom abolished not grand juries back in the 1930s. But grand juries are like a star chamber. And every day, probably today, and it's going to happen tomorrow in Clayton County, a grand jury is going to convene. A defendant doesn't even know they're meeting. He can't be there. He can't have his attorney there. And that prosecutor can tell that grand jury whatever he wants to tell them without that person there, without their defense there, without them being able to hear what that prosecutor is saying, without them able to present evidence to show their innocence. And then next thing you look, they're indicted. So what happens then? A lot of people, they're indicted. Well, let's go back to this. That prosecutor can tell him whatever he wants, and there's no checks and balances for it. So it's interesting that that if I lie to a grand jury or you lie to a grand jury, you get charged with perjury. Prosecutors have a license to lie to grand juries, and there's no way to hold them accountable, and that needs to change. Do the answer? Well, of course, I would love to see them abolished. Is that easy? Of course not. That requires a constitutional amendment, but they need to at least be reformed, if not abolished. Because if that was fixed, if that one grand jury process was fixed, you would not see probably half of what you see as far as convictions and prison population and everything like that. Because there's no way these prosecutors could go to a judge and have to present the elements of a crime and actually get a real charge for a real reason. But then look at this. You're convicted. You're not convicted, but you're indicted now. So what happens next? Well, most people don't have the finances to take it to trial. Most people are afraid about that. So what do? They get offered a plea deal, which I think sometimes Troop refers to it as a plea gun being held to your
Yeah,
head.
a plea gun, correct.
Exactly. Exactly. So, okay, well, I spent all this money and I take this risk, and then basically you're told that, well, if I don't take this deal, I'm gonna double the time or whatever, which should be completely unconstitutional, because how is executing your constitutional right to actually go to trial? Why should you get more time for going to trial than you do
Right.
for just taking a plea? So a lot of people who are actually innocent take a plea because they don't see another way out. And then all of a sudden, you got this convicted felon status with people who are actually innocent. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not naive. There are people who are actually guilty, but there are other things that go on in the system that's unfair to them as well. As I write about in the book, most of the people who helped me write that book never said that they were innocent. What they said is they were treated unjustly. They talk about the overcharging, they talk about the over sentencing. So, how do people get overcharged? Well, they usually get overcharged in grand juries because they don't
Right.
have to worry about the element. I mean, there's a case that we got like that in Clayton County where two coaches are charged with murder, and it's obvious that they didn't intend to kill someone. They may have been negligent, but they're charged with the highest charge. And that's how these things happen in grand jury. So you get overcharged. Then you go for a judge, and next thing you look, you get over sentenced. And you got people serving, like the gentleman that had his wife send me this shirt. He's actually serving a 23-year sentence for a nonviolent drug offense. So now let's think about this a second. If putting him in prison for 23 years actually worked, how do we explain all the drugs that was at the prison you and I were at, Troop? Because it was full. There were weeks you and I didn't see each other because they shut the prison down because so
Shut the
many
whole
drugs was
prison
coming
down.
in on the yard.
Correct.
So you send him there to stop the drug problem, and the drug problem is everywhere, including there in the prison.
Including in the prison.
Exactly.
More prevalent in the prison than on the
Absolutely.
street. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you got people being overcharged, you got people being over sentenced. And then there's another aspect to this. You've got prison reform, which is very important. And that's something that I can say a little bit about because I used to run a jail. And then, of course, I got to spend time in a prison with this gentleman here who's now my friend. And I've got to see both sides of it. Whether the person is guilty or not, he deserves to be in a clean environment, not an environment where there's black mold coming down from the wall in the bathrooms and it's flooded like
Right.
where I was at. And we see this problem prevalent. And, that's one reason why I was a stickler about running my jail paramilitary and keeping it clean and keeping Lysol in there all the time. Because if you don't, you get infections, you get bed bugs. Another thing is food quality. There was, you heard it said by the Chrisleys, and they're not joking about that. You go to the cafeteria and some of the food stuff is outdated. I know you can talk about that. So
Correct.
you're talking about the conditions. So whether you're guilty or not, whether you need to be there or not, you should be able to be there under decent sanitary conditions, and you shouldn't have to worry about getting stabbed to death or getting raped or getting robbed which we see that going on not just at the prison that he and I was at, but now at the county jails, and unfortunately, even at the jail I used to command when that was zero there. And then last but not least, we got to get back to this because I started back at the beginning of it when I talked about how we treat convicted felons. We got to talk about loss of rights, the loss of the right to vote, the loss of the right to be in a political process, which is how this ended up happening with me because it was a political prosecution to disqualify me from running for office. But fortunately, our forefathers had some wisdom and they made it so that running for Congress, that can't bar you from that. So I guess it's still true that anything is possible in America. But those type of things we need to be addressed. And I'm the man for that job because I've experienced both. And last but not least, let me bring up one other issue as well too. When we talk about free labor or slave labor, which is one of the reasons you have me read that Constitution. But I think the highest paying job, correct me if I'm wrong, Troop, but the highest paying job there, I think was 18 cents an hour. Now,
Something
am
like
I
that.
correct or was it higher?
And it might be a little bit higher if you worked in Unicore, which is a factory producing goods for the government.
You're
But
right. I thought I was
mhm.
offered the highest paying job because I tried to get a job and it was 18 cents an hour. What was that in Unicore?
I'm not sure, but those guys make probably $300 a month.
Right.
Uh, 8 hour days, a lot of overtime. So they
Exactly.
make anywhere from $300 to $500 a month. Me myself, I worked 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and I think I made $65 a month, seventy-five
Right.
dollars a month, something like that.
So think about this. These guys, there are guys that are there that are willing to work. Because there are a lot of guys that it didn't work. All they did was sleep and play dominoes and
Correct.
do all the other stuff. These guys are saying, "Hey, I'm willing to work." And these are guys that want to work, want to make money, probably would love to be able to earn money and send it back to their families or whatever. And I'm not saying we should pay inmates $100,000 a year, but I think it's
Hmm.
reasonable if they can make minimum wage like everybody else because they're doing the work. And that unicorn stuff is hard labor.
Hmm.
So that's the type of system that we got going on right now. And those are the type of things that I expect, not expect, but I shall and will address in Congress. And I think now is a very, very good time to address those things. Before I go to that next issue, you want to add anything to that, Troop?
I think that people don't really realize that in the prison, the prisoners. Well, I'm gonna say in federal prison because I've never been in state prison, but the actual inmates run the day to day operations. And when you look at the number of inmates versus staff, you might have 1,800, 2,000 inmates and what 50 staff maybe. And so we're good enough to run their operation there, but when we get on the street, if we go apply for a government job on the street, no, you got a conviction. But I was good enough to run your operation on that side of the fence. And so I think the notion that just being a convicted felon is just ridiculous because people want jobs. People don't want to go back to prison. People don't want to keep the recidivism rate high, and I think if you show that you want to work and show that you want to, be uh, how can I say it, produce good in society, then you should be given that opportunity. Uh,
Well said. Well said. Well, let's go to the second thing that everybody wants to know. There are people asking, am I running as a Republican or Democrat? And probably the reason that's being asked, and let's just be straight about it and be honest. I think the reason people are asking that question is because my prosecution was by Democrats. It was a
mhm,
a local DA Democrat, a local DA chairman that came up with the idea to have me prosecuted to see if he could get the seat. It was a Democratic appointed federal judge that was friends with the DA, whose husband once worked for the DA and who was also friends with my political opponent that not only rig the trial, but coerce a conviction in my case. So I think a lot of people are saying, well, I wonder if he's running as a Republican because it was the Democrats that were responsible for that. And of course, we all know I've ran as a Democrat my entire political career. Well, to answer that question, I think a good analogy I would have to give is my family. Uh, we got some interesting people in my family. We got a nephew that my brother had to deal with. We share a nephew that my brother had to deal with in his own way. We won't go into details about that. I got a couple of cousins that I had to run out of Clayton County. One I had to put on a Greyhound bus and send back home. Another one, when he got out of jail, he didn't want to get on the Greyhound bus, but we agreed he need to go back to DeKalb County and not come back. But the point I want to make is they're still our family. We still love our nephew. We still love my two wayward cousins. I haven't seen the one that went back to DeKalb County, but if he's watching, I think he knows I still love him. I just want him to do better. And so I say that to say this. Just like I had to call out the wayward people in my family, but they're still my family,
Mhm.
I'm going to run as a Democrat. I'm going to remain a Democrat. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to call out the craziness that has happened in the Democratic Party. This stuff with lawfare prosecutions using the criminal justice system to weaponize it against political figures. Not just me. It happened to Burl Ellis in DeKalb County. It happened to the mayor in New York. I mean, they are responsible for a lot of that. We have a lot of Democratic prosecutors that are outright crazy and need to be dealt with here, especially here in Georgia. But I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Instead of doing that, I'm going to remain in the party and let's see if we can bring some strength to the party and bring some common sense to it. You know, we got to be honest. Right now, the Democratic Party is dysfunctional and weak. And that's just calling the truth. But let's see if we can save it. Let's see if we can make it strong, especially when it comes to stuff like criminal justice reform, especially when it comes to stuff like crime. We're weak on crime. I don't know of a city ran by a Democrat that they have control of the crime. I think I was the only Democrat that was tough on crime, and maybe that's why I had some Democrats come at me and set me up for this particular thing. But
Mhm.
I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm going to remain a Democrat, but at the same time, there are things that need to be corrected, especially lawfare and those type of prosecutions. So I will be running as a Democrat. So the next thing that I've been asked is what district I'm running in. I think the media has pretty much told everyone that I'm running for the 13th district, which is a district that's held by a gentleman named Congressman David Scott. Let me say this, and this to show you how much faith we need to have in the media. Congressman Scott is like a father figure to me. He's an elder statesman. When I first ran for the House of Representatives in 2002, and that's something a lot of people don't know, that I was in the Georgia House of Representatives and that I have a legislative experience. He was running then, and I learned a lot from him then. And I think one thing that needs to happen is we've got to always retain respect for our elders. He's an elder statesman. He's a person that I want to work alongside and learn from. He's been there since 2002, so there's a lot to be learned. And you know, we can't. I think there's more to being a representative than youth and vigor. Sometimes you need some wisdom and experience. And I think that's what he has. So we want to respect our elders. I'm very disappointed that there are people that are trying to take advantage of the fact that he has gotten up in age and making all type of accusations that he's in hospice or whatever. And they're like vultures waiting for someone to go on to glory just so they can get a position. I don't like that. It sickens me. And I hope the Lord gives him 20 or 30 more years and he stays in Congress so they can wait longer. So with that being said, no, I'm not running for the 13th district. I'm running for the 5th district. Running for the 5th district, I'm running on the issues that we talked about. It has nothing to do about anyone who's running for that seat or currently has that seat, but it's about those issues that need to be addressed. Let me also say this. Something very interesting happened when I ran in 2002 to get elected to the Georgia House of Representatives. That was when Georgia turned red. So we had a Republican governor and a Republican Senate for the first time in 100 years, my understanding. And this is what I did. Instead of going back and forth with the Republicans and calling them racist and getting involved in all this other stuff that folks didn't agree in, what I did was sat down and worked across party lines to see what could be accomplished. And the first thing that the governor wanted me to work on with, I couldn't help him with that. But we had a good conversation. I said, look, Governor, I can't help you with this, but I do want to work with you. And I think there are things that we can work on and accomplish together. And he agreed. At that time, it was Governor Sonny Perdue, first Republican governor, I believe, in Georgia in 100 years. And we did work together and we got some amazing things done. I was able to author and pass 4 bills into law. And the bill I'm the most proud of is if House Bill 1093. And what that bill did was protect untold amounts of children from being protected from child molesters. There used to be a time where a child molester who was already a known child molester could actually get a job at a daycare center, get a job at an elementary school.
Wow.
And that bill actually stopped that because it had to be disclosed. And that's the bill I'm the most proud of. That's an issue that transcends Republican, Democrat, or whatever. I think with the issues that I want to address that affects everybody, I think we got an amazing opportunity. If there was ever a time that we could reform this criminal justice system, if there's ever a time we could deal with lawfare, with rogue prosecutors like the two we have here in Georgia and the ones we're starting to see across the nation, now's the time. For the first time in the history, we have a black woman who's been appointed as a pardon czar. Here's a woman was sentenced to 25 years of life for a drug conviction, nonviolent. So
Hmm.
certainly she understands the type of things that Troop and I understand and everything like that. Whoever thought we would see that? And then even more interesting is the new deputy director of the BOP is a man that spent time in federal prison. So I think if there was ever a time that we could address these issues, grand juries, convicted felons, or whatever, we have people in power now that have been victims of lawfare, uh, up to and including the president who ran as a convicted felon. And if we can't agree on anything else, we can at least agree on this and get this done. So there's a caucus in Congress I'm very interested in, and it's called the Problem Solving Caucus. And that's where Democrats and Republicans sit down together and see what can we agree on, what can we work on. Okay, I think we know what we don't agree on, or maybe we do, maybe we don't. I'm gonna look at
Hmm.
each thing separately, but what can we get done? What can we get done? And that's what I'm interested in accomplishing while I'm there, and that's what I'm interested in being a part of. So, with that being said, that's my platform and my announcement in a nutshell. I guess at this point, I get to get questioned by my two brothers, my blood brother and my newfound brother that I met under those circumstances. Is there anything y'all like to ask or add to this?
One of the things that's going to come up is the media and how it's going to be played out with you and the media. You've been
Hmm.
known in the past not to give those type of interviews, and we've talked a little bit about it. So, talk to us a little bit more about how you want to go ahead and continue that. Um, if nothing else, more than what you've done in the past, it seemed to work very well. How are we going to handle that?
Well, when I was sheriff, I communicated directly to my constituents. I didn't deal with a middleman because, as we know, the media can lie by omission and commission. And, I'm glad you brought that up because the media is another issue that we may have to deal with once in Congress. And let me tell you why. When you look at these so called convictions and indictments that come up, part of the reason these people get indicted, like I did, it has to do with the media. The media convicts you in a court of public opinion and you don't have a chance to a fair trial. Now, I do believe in the freedom of the press, but I don't believe in the freedom to lie, which they do a whole lot of times. So most of my contact with the public is, we're in an amazing time with social media where I can talk directly to my constituents, just like I used to do when I was sheriff, through text messaging or whatever. And I'm going to go directly to the people with my message. Now, we know the media is going to be out there and they're going to do what they do, and that's fine. But I think everyone knows they can come to this platform. I'm going to be communicating directly with them. And I think that's going to make all the difference in the world. I was elected 4 times as sheriff without the help of the media. Certainly, I can be elected in Congress. And I think the American people have already proven that they're not really interested in the media or prosecutors anymore, the criminal justice system. They just want people that's going to work for them. Let me add one more thing to it, if I may.
Mhm.
Let me add one more thing to it, if I may. A good friend of mine that I'm very close with, he knew that I was going to run in the 5th district. And the 5th district has parts of Atlanta, DeKalb, South Fulton, or whatever. And he asked me an interesting question. He said, "Hey, have you reached out to the mayor or some of the elected officials there to let them know what you're about to do?" And I told him, "No, I didn't." And let me tell you why. And it's no insult to the mayor. I like the mayor. He's a nice guy. There's a lot of people there I like, and then there's some people I don't like. And I mean, that's just what it is in politics. But let me tell you why I haven't done that. I was once told something by a great man, a great Georgian. And he said something to me I'll never forget, and it sent my political career on another trajectory. He said, "The power is not in the hands of the man or woman who drafts legislation. And the power is not in the hands of the man or woman that signs or vetoes legislation. He said that the power is in the hands of the man or the woman who casts the ballot, who decides who's going to draft legislation, or who decides who's going to sign or veto the legislation." He said that's where the true power is. And when he told me that, it sent me on another path. I rarely went to events with other elected officials, not because I had anything against them or whatever. I went to the people. I went to the common everyday guy. I didn't go to the county commission and ask them, "Hey, will you endorse me?" I was with the janitors, the cooks, the contractors, the business people, the everyday people, the silent majority. Those are the people that go vote. Those are the people that I made sure I protected. And they took care of me. That's why no matter what the media said, or no matter how many charges people made up, they always elected me because I went directly to them, not to politicians, not to celebrities endorse me, to the people. That's where the power was. And that's where I stayed. And that's where I'm going to go back again, to the people. Just like a good cop wears out the leather in his shoes, knocking on doors, talking to people, getting information. Starting tomorrow, I'll be going to see the people.
Talk to me about this. Are you going to do debates?
Now that I will do.
Okay.
That I will do.
All right.
There's a lot to be said. A lot of people in this race, they're going to come up. Well, he's a convicted felon. He was convicted. I was wrongfully convicted. There's a book about it. There's a documentary that's coming out called American Lawfare, that's going to show what truly happened in that case, the inconsistencies, the lies, the connections, the judge being friends with my political opponent on Facebook, being friends with the DA, or a husband working for the DA at a time where they came up with another ridiculous RICO charge that I drove my car out of town, therefore it's RICO, and therefore it's theft of a motor vehicle, the police car. All of that stuff is going to be addressed in there. And what we got to understand is this: it's not just politicians and celebrities that are victims of lawfare. There are people being victims of lawfare every day. It's just that the media don't cover them because they're not known like I am or some of the other people we know. And so the issues I'm fighting for, I'm not just fighting for people to be able to run for office without being indicted to stop them, and or for whatever like that. I'm running for the everyday man. And like I said before, if you're a convicted felon, related to a convicted felon, dating a convicted felon, married to a convicted felon, friends with a convicted felon, or don't want to become a convicted felon, I'm the man, because I'm going to take that head on. I'm going to fight lawfare like it's never been fought before.
Tory, do you got anything? Because I got a ton, but I want to make sure that you're good.
No, I don't have any questions, but I believe that the when he says that there are a lot of people that are convicted through lawfare, I don't think the public really understands how often and how much that actually goes on. And when you look at if they're able to do it to a powerful person like our president, who has the means and the money to fight against the government, what do you think they're doing to regular people like us who don't have a voice, who don't have money? We don't have a chance. And so I think him exposing that and really bringing it into the light, it really needs to be done so people can realize what's going on. People tend to have this tendency of, nobody cares about what's going on in prison behind those walls. It's like, if you want to hide something, put it in prison because nobody cares. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to know what's going on there. Nobody wants to know why you're there. They just assume, oh, you're in prison. You must have did something wrong. But that's not the case, you know? And I've been in, like I said, I've been in federal prison 3 times. I've actually, and when you talk about nonviolent crimes, I've actually met people there who took a leak outside in a park that was federal property, and they have a year in jail. They're a convicted felon because they took a leak outside. Like, how do you ruin somebody's life for something like that? And they have to carry around that status as a convicted felon for the rest of their lives. Nobody looks and says, "Oh, it was just because he took a leak outside." All they see is convicted felon. So uh, I think Vic's doing a very good thing, something that's really needed.
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the things is, what would you say, Vic, about individuals who say you're doing this just to rebrand your efforts? And after they say, hey, guess what? You had all these legal setbacks. I know you, so I know how that this is about to come out. So um, I'm gonna let you have the floor.
Well, let me quote another great Georgian, my late play uncle. When he told me one day, he said, "Son, lions don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep." We'll just end it at that right there.
Yeah. In other words, what he's saying is, F y'all. I'm gonna go ahead and be his interpreter on that one.
Well, now let me say this. And it's interesting. Here's the one thing I can promise everyone: you may not like where I stand,
Mhm.
but you will always know where I stand, and that's rare in politics today. Uh, and I think that's important. I think that's why I relate to the everyday man. Because people are tired of being lied to. If people are tired of being told one thing and then you do another. And it's rare you find people, especially in politics, that say what they mean and mean what they say and tell you what they're going to do. There was a gentleman that used to be the chairman of our county many many years ago. He was the most powerful chairman in the history of Clayton County. His name was Charlie Griswold. I got a lot of respect from him. Of course, he came back from a different time, a different era. He and I weren't always political allies. We actually kind of started out kind of rough, but when I got to know him and he got to know me, he became like a father figure. But what I really liked about Mr. Griswold, and he's passed now, and again, he was a traditional Southern politician. Some people used to call him Boss Hog or whatever like that. But one thing I liked about him, even if he didn't agree or didn't do what I thought was best, he told me he wasn't going to do it. And if he told me he was going to do it, he did it. And I have so much respect for him for that, because there's very few people that you can shake their hand and they're a man of their word. Well, like I said, you may not like where I stand, but you're going to know where I stand.
Right.
And it's not going to be politics. I'm going to speak my mind and I'm going to speak the truth. And like I said, there's some things that need to be called out. And unfortunately, there's things that need to be called out in the Democratic Party, like all of this lawfare and political prosecution. We have some horrible prosecutors in a Democratic Party, and it's wrong. And it's wrong whether they're doing, not just if they're doing it to Democrats, is whether they're doing it to Republicans or anybody else. If you don't like a person, then don't vote for them. But you don't indict people and try to make them convicted felons so they can't win or send them to prison. That's wrong. And those people need to be dealt with. My career in law enforcement was born out of a murder. That's why a lot of people refer to me as Batman. And that's why I'm happy you got that shirt on. Not the hat, but the shirt. And it happened because a childhood friend of mine was murdered and mutilated. And that's when I decided I was going to hunt every murderer down for the rest of my life. And I did it over the course of the next 30 years. Well, now I have seen and been the victim of lawfare, of rogue prosecutors, of a system that indicts people with falsities or whatever, overcharge people. And now I'm gonna take that fight to them. I'm gonna
Mhm.
take that fight to them in Congress because they need to be dealt with. And they need to go. And there needs to be checks and balances. And I think the best way for us to deal with prosecutors is not to wait every 4 years to see if we can replace them because they can do a lot of damage to people's lives to them. I think we
Mhm.
deal with prosecutors like I used to deal with drug dealers. I wasn't so much concerned with locking up drug dealers as I was concerned with stopping them from selling drugs. So I would simply put a patrol car in front of the trap house or a road check where they just couldn't sell drugs, so they went away. Well, they may not have liked it, but they didn't have to go to prison for 30 years. And the drugs was in the community. Everybody else was happy. So everything worked well. Well, what do you take away from prosecutors that they're using to abuse the system? That's grand juries. Most of the things that they're able to do to people with lawfare and these unjust prosecution is grand juries because that's a star chamber. Again, like I said earlier, you can indict a ham sandwich. You go in there and talk to 12 people and you tell them whatever you want. And they're not there. They can't defend themselves. They don't have an attorney there. And if we reform that grand jury, or I pray to God it can be abolished like the United Kingdom did and every other country did, then we take away from these corrupt rogue prosecutors the ability to mess with people's lives the way they have been doing. And I'm
Right.
gonna be at the forefront of that fight.
What about the people who often described your leadership as being authoritarian? And at that point in time, they, they go about saying, "Hey, guess what? Do you think that that's what's needed now in Washington D.C.? What's
I
your thought?"
think it's needed, and I think it's especially needed in the Democratic Party. I think we need some strong masculine energy in the Democratic Party. And I don't make any bones about it. A lot of times I use people say I ruled by fear and intimidation, or I ruled the jail with fear and intimidation. I prefer not to use the word rule. I prefer govern or lead, but call it what you want. I've never apologized from that, and I've never backed down from that. And let me tell you why. I was taught how to fight crime by the best in the business, the legendary Reuben Greenberg. And let me tell you what he taught me. He would always say this story. He said that he used to work in a jurisdiction where there was a 90-year-old woman that used to push a grocery carriage full of money, a grocery buggy full of money. She never got robbed. No one didn't even stare, didn't even think about it. And this is where all the robbers and killers were, and they would rob any stranger that came through, but they didn't rob her. Why? Because they knew whose money that was. And they feared what would happen if they robbed her. Because they knew if they robbed her, the consequences would be swift and severe.
Mhm.
And he said, that's how we have to police. He said, if the criminals know that the consequences will be swift and severe, we won't have problems. And he ran the criminals out of Charleston City. They were afraid to come to Charleston. They were afraid of him, and it worked. And the people, we enjoyed his leadership. Well, he taught me that, and I brought that to Clayton County, and I made it a situation where criminals were afraid to come to Clayton County. Troop and I would joke, and we're not going to go into any details about that, but he didn't
Mhm.
come to Clayton County, and he paid me the ultimate respect. And we're not going to go into that.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is, it's needed for order. And you could say what you want. It's the truth. Like I said, you may not like where I stand, but you'll always know where I stand.
Right.
And
Right.
that's where I
Mhm.
stand. And
Right.
it's going to be on strength. And yeah, I think the Democratic Party needs some strong masculine energy right about now. And there's certain issues we need to get tough on. And we need to get off of issues like lawfare and prosecuting people because we don't want to see them run for office. That needs to be dealt with. And I'm going to be at the forefront of that battle. And I
Right.
don't apologize for it and won't flinch on it.
Right. 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 Because if we're talking about apples and oranges and then lemons to the oranges, let's talk about this. If you were to, you're going to win, right? Let's go ahead and understand that. So the fifth district is yours. Have no have no doubts about that. Do you want to be seen as a survivor of the system or the reformer of the system?
Both,
Both.
because the system tried to take me out. Not only did they try to eliminate me from being in politics, as you'll see in this documentary coming out called American Lawfare, but they also tried to put me into a situation where they knew, well, I may not survive. Cops don't do well in prison. So they knew what they were doing when they put me into a housing unit, and the worst housing unit at that particular prison. So yeah, I survived it. But let me tell you how I survived it. Here's what's interesting, and you can read about it in the book, and I think and I believe that the people making the documentary is going to cover some of this. A lot of people talk about this thing called community policing.
Yeah.
And I don't think they really know what community policing is. They think it's making a rap video and break dancing and breastfeeding a baby and getting on TV and crying and all that craziness there. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Because real criminals do not stop raping and robbing because the police chief or sheriff is on TV crying. So, but let me tell you what I did do. I made sure that people were safe. I made sure the seniors were safe. Matter of fact, I was indicted. One of the charges because I was protecting two senior citizen ladies that were beaten savagely in a grocery store. And I think what people don't understand is this: a lot of people, even the so-called convicted felons, when I was in prison, this gentleman was one of them. There was a drug lord from DeKalb County. And they basically said, hey, look, we lived in Atlanta. We got family in his county. They felt safe. This guy was like Robin Hood. He's
Mhm.
not a bad cop. If he was one, we would tell you, and y'all could do whatever y'all want to do. So I had gentlemen on the other side of the law that stuck up for me because they appreciated me keeping their family safe. Not because I got on TV and cried, not because I was breastfeeding babies or playing with baby dolls or whatever like that, because I was getting a job done. And a lot of people don't understand this. So-called people in prison, they don't like crime either.
Mhm.
They don't want their tablets stolen or whatever. You'd be surprised, and I write about in the book how they dealt with the thieves and the crackheads and stuff like that was in prison. You know, you know, we had the guy that ran our unit was basically, I referred to him as the sheriff,
Mhm.
and he kind of ran that unit the way I ran the county. And beyond, so did this gentleman, but that's another story, and we'll talk about that another time.
Mm.
So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah. And what about this? You're talking about, we talked a little bit about this, so I wanted to put this out there, was a little bit about your funding and your campaign. You're looking at donors, small dollar donors, or you're talking about big dollar donors. I mean, you're pretty dynamic when it comes to that.
I am, but let me tell you something. This is probably going to be one of the greatest grassroots street fight campaigns, because I'm going to take this to the street, the everyday man, the everyday voter. That's who I'm going to see.
Mm.
And this is what I'd like to see. If, you know, convicted felons have been removed from the political process, and I think a lot of them didn't know. I didn't know until Troop and the other guys educated me that no, you still can be in the political process. You can still run for Congress. And even if you can't vote, you can donate to a campaign. No one can stop you from going to donating to a campaign. I want to, I will start fundraising next week, but let me tell you this. I want to ask in advance if every convicted felon would give $1, because I'm going to fight for you. I think that would be more than enough money for this campaign. And if you're not a convicted felon, give $2. But this is going to be a street fight that's going to be taken on a grassroots level for the everyday man, the everyday voter. This is not a normal campaign where we just, hey, I have a wife and kids and I'm free of sin and I'm perfect or whatever. Let me tell you this: people aren't looking for somebody perfect anyway. It The last recorded perfect man we know who that was, and
We
there's
know
no
who it was.
indication that he it tends to come back and run for office. He doesn't
Right.
appear to be innocent.
Right.
And if we're going to get, I'm not a preacher, but if we want to get technical, he was a convicted felon.
Hmm.
Lawfare was used against him. So nobody's looking for perfection. people want people they can relate to. If you
Right.
look at one of my debates when I ran for sheriff, one of the reporters there brought up that I had filed for bankruptcy. Don't you think that's a
Yeah.
problem? No, I think that means that I can relate to the everyday man
Everyday
who
man,
had to
everyday
file for
problem.
bankruptcy. Right.
Exactly. That's
I'm
life.
one of you. Well, now I can relate not just to cops, I can relate to the other side. I was locked up with them. I'm one of them. I can relate to them. I'm one of both. I'm an everyday man. I think that was the whole idea. If we're going to talk spirituality, of why he came down anyway, so he could walk among us and see the type of craziness that's here.
Mhm.
So there we go. So all of the stuff about convicted felon, that's what I'm running on. And like I said, to all of the self-righteous people that want to talk about convicted felons, remember he was a convicted felon, and he's the only perfect person that can run for office. And I don't think he's interested in running, so I'm gonna have to run.
Right, right, right. Nothing that you have to address now, but have you have a somewhat an idea about all types of reform? We talked about prison reform, but let's talk about um, do you have a general idea about healthcare reform, education, so on and so forth, or is that something you're still crafting?
Let me tell you this. Here's what I learned when I was a member of the Georgia General Assembly. I got there and I had this bright idea about education,
Mm,
and I drafted up a bill. And there were some teachers that were there that were in the House of Representatives as well too. And they said something that I'll never forget. They went over the bill with me and they told me why it didn't make sense. And they said something I'll never forget. They said, "Look here, you're a cop. Stick with that.
mm,
Let us deal with the education thing because that's our expertise. We don't question you when it comes to law enforcement.
mm,
Don't question us when it comes to education. And work with us and maybe co-sponsor something or something like that." And you know what? They were right. And that's what I did. I concentrated on my expertise.
mm.
There's a lot of issues when you become a state representative or a senator, things you don't even think of. There was a poultry bill that came up. Look, what do I know about poultry other than every now and then I shouldn't, but I go to Kentucky Fried Chicken? What do I know about chicken? Right. So what did I do? I had to sit down with the farmers and say, okay, hey, you guys are farmers, educate me. What do I need to know? So each issue, I need to get educated on the people it affects. There are certain things that I'm not going to know anything about.
Mm.
There are women issues. I'm not a woman. I've never carried a child. So, I mean, there's issues that I need to sit down and talk with the people that affect before I get out and tell you this and that. And then I'll make my decision. So, with that being said, I want to do what those teachers taught me when I was in the General Assembly, stick to the issues I know, and then do the research and talk to the people these issues affect, and then go from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense because all your constituents are going to be up and down and around. And so that's going to be one of the things that they'll ask eventually. In addition to it, let's talk about the people who feel as though um, that you are not going to be fair with them. Um,
Now, who would that be?
that
Yeah,
would be
who
probably the
would that
people
be?
who are now your enemies, and so on
Yeah.
and so forth. And do they have anything to fear?
I think, again, okay, I'm not a preacher, but a scripture comes to mind that the guilty flee when there's no one to pursue them. I used to always think about that when I was a cop because sometimes I would pull up on a corner and people would just start running. Well, you've experienced that in Baltimore.
Mhm.
I mean, I just pulled up. I was just going to get something to drink, and all of a sudden, the guys that were there taking off running. I mean, I was going to tell them to leave, but I wasn't going to tell. It's not like I was coming at them.
Right.
And I think if those people feel that way, they have something to be guilty about, and they know what it is. I think we know who some of those people are. I
Mhm.
mean, they're in the book, they're in the documentary. You notice that book has been out for a while, and no one has said anything. No one has sued and said defamation of character because they know it's all true.
Mhm.
They know it was a rigged case. They know they lied to the grand jury. They know the judge rigged it by coercing a verdict or whatever. No one has ever disputed it. And and since we're doing these lying quotes, and I think I quoted this the other day, it's been said that the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. All you got to do is set it loose.
Correct.
It'll defend itself.
Let's talk about your public image. Okay.
Yeah.
And with
What
that being
public
said,
image?
the public image, I mean, it's all over. I mean, I've been dealing with this for a few decades with you, right?
Right.
So let's talk about this. You talk about some people who are just going to go ahead and, they're shaped by a certain reality, if you will, right?
Hmm.
So is it more so the reality they're getting this public image of you, or is it like the media perception, or is it just the mystery because you haven't given interviews?
Right. Well, let me tell you this. Throughout my career, people who I've met on a personal basis will always say, you're not the guy that's portrayed in the media. What I've heard or whatever, I didn't, this is not matching up. And right. And of
Hmm.
course, because the media lies. Well, see, that's the reason why I kept getting reelected, because the voters knew me, because they knew me. I went to see them. I went and knocked on their doors. I was at their funerals of their loved ones, at their weddings, whatever. They got to know me because I was always there with them, especially the church mothers, because they fed me well, because I don't know how to cook. But they knew me. So there was nothing nobody could tell them. No prosecutor could make up something or whatever. So they got to know me. And I think it's so important before you pass judgment on anybody, because I often have these conversations when conversations come up about different politicians and people tell me what politicians they hate. And I always ask them, have you ever met the guy? You're only going by the media and you
Hmm.
can't believe anything they say. So why don't you meet the person yourself before you make those type of decisions, instead of making your decisions off of CNN or Channel 2 News with those clowns, and meet the person yourself and see what's going on. And I'm going to go meet the people.
Right.
I'm gonna be knocking on their door. This is gonna be a street camp. I'm gonna spend the next year of my life meeting the people. They can get to meet me.
Mhm.
Don't listen to the news. See if you like me. See what it is. And I think, and that's how I've always run the campaign. That's why I got elected 4 times,
Right.
because I went and met the voters. I didn't
Right.
worry about the news or what they say. And I think people are pretty much realizing they can't trust anything the news say. And I think that's why you see people turning more to podcasts for news than they go to the actual media.
Right. Right. And we've talked about that many times before. Let's talk about some more about the critics. Okay. And as you know, they want to go ahead and perceive you as you being the proponent of punitive cycle that, people go into the system in and out. So are you going to change that from a punitive situation now to more a rehabilitative station now? Um, uh, now that we're talking about reform.
Actually, both. Okay. Well, brother, you know this, and a lot of people who know me. I'm addicted to Tai Chi. I love Tai Chi. It's my favorite martial art, and not and it has really nothing to do with fighting. It has to do with the meditation, the development. But the one thing about Tai Chi, it teaches us balance, yin yang. Light, dark, strong, soft, a balance. And if you look at Chinese medicine, that's what it's about too. It's like something is out of balance, and that's how you get your health back. Well, there has to be a balance. Like, let's take prison for instance. No, I'm always going to be hard on crime. I'm always going to believe that people who rape, rob, and murder should go to prison. But that's what prison was designed for dangerous individuals that if they're loose, people could get raped, robbed, or murdered. Okay, well, you start sending people to prison for 30 years for nonviolent drug offenses, for whatever, tax evasion or whatever, that
Yeah.
serves no purpose whatsoever, especially the drugs, since most of the drugs is in prison, as Troop has verified. And I think we all know, I saw it, he saw it.
Mhm.
But prison is designed for dangerous people. But let me tell you something interesting about this, and this is what I was taught by my mentor. Did you know that most people, when they're released from prison after the age of 35, they rarely reoffend? Rarely. It's almost zero. There's something about that age from between 14 and 35 where people commit the most violence or whatever like that. There's some young bloods out there that if they're not locked up, they're gonna rape, rob, and murder or whatever. But it's something about that age at 35. The reason I bring this up is this: we got to take another look at life without parole. I had an old warden tell me something I'll never forget one day. He said he went to visit his lifers, and when he got to this one particular prison in that state, There were men walking with rifles on the roof. There was people circling around. But when he went inside, there were guys on dialysis, on walkers and wheelchairs. And he asked them, he said, "Why do y'all have all this armed security there?" And they said, "Well, hey, these guys are here for murder. They're here for whatever." He was like, "Well, who can they murder now?" And he was also like, even if they got out, what could they do? This guy here has to get to dialysis. This other guy's in a wheelchair. I mean, where can they run? What can they do? So we got to take a second look at that, because all we're running at a certain point is a convalescent home. And like my mentor, the late Reuben Greenberg, would say, he said, after that certain amount of time, that's when we can start to get folks back into society, because the chances of them reoffending at that point slows down. It's rare that they reoffend. And then he cracked a joke, but it might be true to it. He said usually the only people after 35 that start going to prison are lawyers, and that's another story. But it was interesting that he said that, and he was a very tough proponent, hard on crime. But even he realized locking up people for the rest of their lives doesn't make sense. And even the violent ones, we need to lock them up to the point to where that violence can cease. Because at this point, remember this, everything affects society from prison, the economy, everything. The Federal Bureau of Prisons is a $8 billion industry. And I don't know if people understand the difference between a billion and a million. If you sleep for a billion seconds, you will sleep 32 years. If you lay $1 billion in the end, it will encircle the earth 4 times. That's a lot of money spent that could be doing something else if we take these nonviolent people and get them back out there doing stuff that they won't harm anybody, because most of them don't want to harm anybody anyway.
Right, right. So you're in favor with cutting down the trial penalty. And for those people who don't know, is basically a little bit what we were talking about earlier with Troop. Where people are going to go ahead and give you, a prosecutor is going to go ahead and give you a plea deal. But if you don't, then you have to deal with the wrath of them giving you a much longer sentence later on, for the same crime, but just because of efficiency and the cost of court and everything like that, what could have been maybe a 7-year sentence, you're going to do triple.
That's wrong. And it's not costing them anything. They're getting paid to be there. It's costing the defendant something to be there. But to tell a person, if he exercises his constitutional right to go to trial so he can try and prove his innocence, that's wrong. If he was going to get 5 years, if he wasn't going, he should get 5 years then. That is wrong.
Right. So I think that was pretty much full circle on what I have. True. What do you got?
I mean, everything that he's talked about, we've talked about numerous times. I think he's dead on. I think the people should understand that just because he's calling for reform in the judicial system, that does not mean that he's being soft on crime. Nobody wants crime. Criminals don't even want crime. Nobody wants to live next door to some guy breaking in the house or selling drugs or doing whatever they're doing, gang banging or whatever. So uh, I think everybody needs to understand that what he's talking about is making the system fair, uh, making it where the Constitution actually means something, and whether or not you're accused of a crime, you have the right to exercise your constitutional right. And if you cannot do that, then what do we have a constitution for? Also, I think that uh, we do need to hold these prosecutors responsible, because look at the responsibility that they carry in their job. They affect thousands upon thousands of people's lives. They have the power. And so, what other profession can you go to and have that kind of profound power to affect lives of people, their lives, their families' lives, the community, and not be held responsible? I mean, if you're a doctor and you operate on somebody or you do a diagnosis, you're held liable, responsible. And so these people have great power and they need to be held responsible for not only the charges that they bring, but just working in that system and honoring the position that the people have given them.
I'm glad you said that, because in addition to taking away their ability to use grand juries the way they do, they also need to be held accountable. If you're lying to a jury, you should be held accountable for that. There's got to be
Mm,
checks and balance where if they're caught lying to grand juries like they did in my case and like they do in so many other cases, that shouldn't be. Because, like I said,
yeah,
nobody else can lie to a grand jury. Why
yeah.
should they be able to lie to a grand jury?
Not only lying to the grand jury, but lying to the judge in the courtroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these are the things we need to think about. And also, I want us to think about the sheer stupidity of the bureaucracy. Let me give you a good example. Remember, I told you the reason I'm wearing this cap, the reason I'm wearing this shirt, this was actually sent to me by the wife of one of the gentlemen that I was locked up with. And like I said, he was one of the ministers that was in that particular Bible study. But let me tell you something that's insane. He was given a 23-year sentence under this first Step Act, Second Chance Act. He would have been eligible to be out already. But guess why they said they wouldn't let him out?
Wow.
Because he had a DUI before he came to prison. 19 years ago, he had a DUI
Mm-hmm.
right before he got this drug charge and got sentenced to 23 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to keep him in prison an extra 2-3 years. That means that they're paying medical, they're paying all of this stuff for him to be there 3 years for
Mm-hmm.
a DUI 19 years ago. Let me
Well, I
tell you
mean,
something. This First Step Act, if they were really enforcing it, a lot of people would already be home. And I'm glad to hear that they're going to enforce it. And I'm excited to hear about this deputy chief that just got there that actually was in federal prison. Like I said, we got
mhm.
an amazing opportunity to attack an issue and change things right now. And I hope everybody see this opportunity. People get caught up in all kind of other stuff. And I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying they're wrong,
Mhm.
but this is an issue that we have the right people in place to make a reformation in the criminal justice system. And we need to seize this opportunity. I never thought I'd live to see something like this. And I want to be a part of making this happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
very much.
the First Step Act was passed by Congress to lower the recidivism rate, to make some changes inside the institutions, to give inmates other opportunities as far as education to prepare themselves to get back on the streets. And it is bewildering how Congress, who passes all of our laws, has passed a law, and then you have the bureaucratic people who sit in the BOP and the other places not following the law. How could
Mhm.
they not follow the law? If we don't follow the law, we wind up in the BOP. So how, because they work in the BOP, that they can just say, oh, you know what? I'm not going to follow that. I don't believe that inmates should have this opportunity. So I'm not going to give them their credits or their uh, programs or whatever it is, just because that's the way they feel. So I think it's just too much of, if everybody has to follow the law, you, and there is no such thing as breaking the law to enforce the law. So
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Brother,
Absolutely.
brother, your
Well,
campaign did start a lot of buzz, and so we're running up on time.
yeah,
But
we are.
I just wanted to tell you, of course, on my end of it, I'm proud of you, even if you wear a Batman shirt.
I
So
am
we'll
too.
we'll just go on that end. But
Well, thank you for putting that Batman shirt on. That
I
means a
gotta
lot to me.
support you, man. I gotta
Thank you.
support you.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
what I gotta
Thank
do,
you.
right?
Yeah.
And so
We all support you.
yeah,
Thank you,
we
sir.
really do. And the comments have been nothing but incredibly supportive. You have so many people that want to go ahead and give to your campaign. So seeing these comments and so on and so forth, they're eager to help support you. I don't know who's running against you in the fifth district, but if they want my personal advice, just don't. And so that's how that goes. And, and anybody else out there, next week we'll go ahead and make things a little bit more clear for everyone.
Awesome. Hey, Troop,
Yeah.
I'm honored to have your endorsement in the Men from the Forest City Correctional Center. I hope they get to see this. I'm sure some of their family members are here. I think I saw a family member here. I
Okay.
appreciate what y'all did. Y'all taught me a lot. And I promise I wouldn't forget you guys. And you have my word. I'm like Black Hawk Down. I don't leave soldiers behind.
Thank you, thank you, and it's definitely an honor for us. It's an honor for us to have met you and have a chance to talk with you and walk with you. And you are, as far as I'm concerned, you're a friend for life.
Thank you,
Mhm.
brother.
All right, gentlemen. Thank you all. And thank you who are subscribing, liking, and certainly commenting. This is all part of, you know, what we're going to do at least weekly is come back live and give you more updates. So please stay tuned for future uh, updates, not only on this channel, but on Keith's personal page, on his TikTok, his Facebook, and so on and so forth. It's really growing, and we like to see that community keep on growing. If you're going to hear anything from Victor, you're going to hear it exactly from him on these platforms. As you heard him, he's not going to go ahead and give those interviews to the media. He'll be right here speaking with you. And in the future, we're going to go ahead and do this live again. If you have questions that you want to ask him, start getting them together, and we'll go ahead and go through them, and we'll start giving them out. So from everyone from the Hill of Justice, the production team, also for Troop. Thank you, our honored guest for today, from coming in,
Thank
and
you.
my brother Victor, who's running for the 5th District in Congress. We want to say good night.
Thank you very
Congratulations,
much.
Jake.
Hey, thank you, brother. And hey, Troop, keep the computer on for a while. Okay.
I got you. I
All
got
right.
Thank
you.
you. All
Take
right.
care, everyone.
I take care.
All right.
Yeah, we're going to keep